Atamaria, boys and girls, it's Ms. Mac back again. So I'm just going to do like a series of videos to crack this out and also just, go over public goods. So one of the questions, if you go back to remember like step one, why is it market failure, is the idea of why the private sector will not provide public goods. And so we think about it, like the whole thing about market failure is this is like a legitimate reason for the government to intervene in a market, in this case, intervene and actually provide the good. So you might have already like clicked on this, like might kind of be obvious, but just in case, let's just kind of go through it and look at the characteristics and how that means that the private sector won't provide these goods. So number one, it's non-rival. If one person uses it, we say technically, theoretically, it's fully available for someone else to use. So another person can use it and it won't rival the use of the first or the second or the third, that kind of thing. I feel like it's the same kind of idea, but non-depletable. There's still the same amount of the resource available for others to use. And the big one, and this is like really think about it, why would they not provide it? It's non-excludable. Once you provide it, all right, it's not possible to stop people using it, even if they haven't contributed to the cost. Even if they haven't contributed to the cost. So we'll look at that shortly soon. There's an issue with that. But yeah, so you can't basically charge a price on this. You can't exclude someone, you can't charge a price on it. And like if it's non-rival, then it's kind of like, well, why should I have to pay for it? Like, there's the same amount for both of us. So there's issues there, meaning that the price cannot be charged. You can't charge a price. And you think about like a business or private sector, they wouldn't be able to get any revenue, and then they wouldn't be able to cover their costs. So I know some of you talk about like a social enterprise. Yeah, they're not in it for profit, but they do need to cover their costs. And if you can't charge a price, you can't get any revenue to cover the costs. And then if we think about profitable businesses who are out to get a profit, if you haven't got any revenue, you can't get any profit. So that's why the private sector will not provide it. And then the whole thing that we're going with is that if the private sector doesn't provide it, and it's like something that society wants, which we want to be defended, we want to have police, we quite like having reserves and parks and things, and streetlights are quite cool too, then someone needs to provide it. And in this case, we're saying the government has to provide it because the private sector will not. So if you're explaining why it's market failure, I feel like this is a really big point to discuss first, especially when you discuss the characteristics of a public good. So what about the government? Like what do they think about, I guess, when they think about providing public goods? Because they don't provide everything just because, there's a need for it or people want it. They don't necessarily provide everything, and that's due to the big idea of scarcity. So here's a cool diagram. I have again lifted this from a PowerPoint that actually is on Moodle anyway, but it's just because that was easier. So we've got MSc, MSB, which you should be familiar with from your externalities learning. And here's this idea here, which is in your textbook. I think it might be in your workbook as well. And it's the idea about government or even like any goods being consumed and produced to the point where the total, the difference between your total social benefit and the total social cost, which is what this is about, is at maximum. So you can sort of see here, they're saying with like the line that the distance here between these two curves is greatest about here, right? Okay, so you're just trying to find, all right, what happens to the total social benefit when you like consume this good? It increases, and then you sort of see it levels off at a point because diminishing marginal utility and all that. And then the total social cost, it increases the more you provide something. So they're kind of saying that the optimal level of provision should be where the distance between the two is at its maximum. And that just happens to be where the marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost. It's beautiful. Beautiful thing, really. Think about it. Economics, it's all about optimization and marginal analysis, where the extra social benefit society gets is equal to the additional cost to society. Beautiful. All right, so that's kind of like what the government should be thinking about. Let's try and provide it up to the point that MSB equals MSc, which would be where the difference between TSB and TSC is at its greatest. Like theoretically, this is what they should do. Then just to throw another spanner in the works, they also do need to think, even between public goods itself, going back a bit there, sorry, if you have two different types of public goods, or, you've got like hundreds of different public goods to provide, do you provide all of them? Can you do that? Or no, because scarcity, the government does only have limited resources, and in particular, that's tax revenue. So they can't provide everything under the sun. They need to make a choice, and there's always going to be what we call a trade-off. When you provide more of something, you have to give up more of the other. And they're using the example of like healthcare and education, which I have issues with, but let's leave that for a moment. They're sort of saying here that if you want to provide more healthcare, it's an example of a potential public good, then it would mean you'd have to give less education to be able to do that. So if you're just choosing between these two public goods, you want more healthcare because you've got limited resources, money in this case, or even just like people and other resources as well, you have to have a choice between them. You have to give up some of that education to have healthcare. I've just put here that when they do this, they do think about efficiency. So they're going back to this idea of maximizing the distance between TSB and TSC, where these two are equal. So that's efficiency. That's the idea of allocative efficiency. But then they also need to take into account equity, which is what we're asking you to do. We're asking you to think about efficiency, allocative efficiency, and we're also asking you to think about equity, particularly with the policies that you choose. So, you know, is it fair to provide this much healthcare? Is it fair to have less education? So they have to think about that and the effect on different groups. And I would also argue they also need to think about getting re-elected. So just a final point before we finish here, education, healthcare, I actually don't think these are very good examples for public goods. One, education, if your behaviour is really bad in class, it does rival the use of others. And if it becomes really bad, we can actually exclude you. You know, you actually have like expulsion and exclusion from class. And probably like with healthcare as well, particularly in New Zealand, we didn't used to exclude people. We kind of sort of did introduce user pays to an extent, but definitely with rivalness, there's too many people like using like the health service. There is less doctors and like medicines and stuff available for everyone else. So I just personally don't think that these are very good examples of public goods, but you know, theoretically and in some ways they do meet the definition. So things for us to think about, all right, is for the government, you know, there's a reason why they have to provide these goods, because the private sector won't. They have to think about efficiency, how to maximize allocative efficiency. They have to think about equity. And so one little issue that comes out of it is if they're to provide these things, they choose how many public goods to provide or which ones to provide, they have to fund it out of our collective taxation. So all your GST, your PAYE, company tax, resident withholding tax, all the tax, all their fees and fines, you know, the dividends from the Cullen Fund and stuff like that. That's all used to, you know, in the budget to pay for a whole heap of things, and some of that is public goods. But one massive issue that comes about from a study of public goods is that people who use the public goods don't all contribute to the cost. All right, and so there's the idea, if you're not a taxpayer and then you're using this good and enjoying benefit from it, you're what we call a free rider. All right, we'll come back to this later because you can maybe think about it, but we're saying a free rider is someone who uses a public good, enjoys it, but they don't contribute to the cost. They're not like a taxpayer. And so this, you know, causes problems later, like when we think about like overusage and stuff like that. Well, you're not even paying for it, so, you know, and you're wrecking my usage. So we have issues like that. So what I want us to do now is I want us to think about, like with our walking tracks in particular, it's our example, I want us to think about this idea of free riders and how maybe they fit into this picture. So again, go to 13 Economics Moodle, go to topic 9 and walking tracks, and then I want you to look at these two links. So you'll see these links, TripAdvisor, it's got a little bit more, but it says TripAdvisor, and then it's got the link to good photos and details on a track. I feel like it's a backpacker or something that I found that on, or some like tourist website. So I want you to have a look there at the information, read it, and then make notes. And I'm still going to say this obviously, so you will have to do your own thinking. With the Stairway to Heaven and other walking tracks, are there people we would classify as free riders? Will you tell me who they are? And then when you do that, how do they then fit the definition of a free rider? And then just lastly, just to like throw something spanner in the works, how could it actually not be a free rider? Because the free rider is someone who uses the tracks, who enjoys the benefit but doesn't contribute to it. So when you think about some of those people who would be accused of free riding, could there possibly be an argument that they're not free riding? All right, a little bit of a deep and meaningful thought for the day. All right, good luck.